We did.
I was about to talk to you about Christian's and Zach's covering of the Netflix series. So Trey, what was your feeling about? Did you get to see finally the whole Netflix series that they did
Oh,
on your
I
father?
did. Yep,
What
I
was
did.
what was your feeling in terms of how they approached that?
Well, I mean, they did okay, but they left a lot of stuff they didn't talk about.
That's Yep. You mean the evidence that we were trying to give to the
Yeah,
Martinsburg police?
yeah, and they never even said my name right, except for, I mean, they did say Trey, but they called me like Jo- not Joseph Daniel. They called me Jeffrey Daniel or something.
Yes, yes. Um, I was really disappointed when I saw that because I was watching episode one, two, three, and then I got to four, and I couldn't believe none of the evidence that I provided them. And with
Yeah,
Gordon, they had everything as a motive for the reason for Danny
yeah,
Casolaro was murdered, not commit suicide, and they deliberately withheld it from the public. And I cannot
yep,
understand what was their motive in doing that, other than I was so saddened for Bill Hamilton and Nancy Hamilton when they're defaming him. He worked for NSA. He ran a software company. You know,
yeah.
they lost everything. They were
I know.
destroyed. He had no sympathy for Bill and Nancy. And then he turns on Michael Riconosciuto, who's giving evidence of murders and also the fact that he was one of the sources of information to Danny and also to Bill Hamilton. But
Yep.
it just wasn't Michael Riconosciuto. I have recorded interviews with three other people who were meeting and talking with Danny Casolaro up to the last day. And they were never interviewed by the police. They were giving independent verification of the evidence that Michael Riconosciuto provided, and they turned on Michael, they turned on William Hamilton, and burnt the sources of all the
Yep.
information for their story. Without those people, and also without all the documents that belong to Michael Riconosciuto, they're exploiting it, telling a fantasy story that Christian Hansen looks like Danny Casolaro, and it's like a fairy story about him looking like Danny Casolaro, your father, walking in his shoes. Your father would never have betrayed his sources. He was loyal. You could tell
Yep.
he was
Yep.
following everything through. In terms of you and I was in communications with George Swartwood, the original investigative detective. I wrote to him on Saturday, the 8th of June 2019, in an email telling him that I have recorded interviews, hundreds of recorded interviews with witnesses that have never been interviewed before. And the most disturbing is our recorded interview with Mr. Sam Cross, the Chief of Indio Police, who was
Yep.
going to meet with your father on the Saturday. On the Saturday, and
Yep.
he believes that Danny was murdered. He also confirms that the same people that he was investigating, all the murders that Michael Riconosciuto was assisting with, was released from prison to assassinate him and a district attorney general later on during further investigations at the Cabazon, Wackenhut facilities and casino. It and your father in his itinerary said that he was investigating the murder of these people, particularly Mr. Paul Marasca, but also was planning to go to India, to Cabazon, to interview the detectives. So why would he not accept this as new evidence and also their attorney writes back, I'm offering to give them access to these recorded interviews, and these people have said that they will testify in any US court that your father was not depressed, that he had received boxes of documents from IRS Computer Center in Martinsburg on the morning of Friday, and that he was going to be meeting with uh, Bill Turner in the afternoon, and that he had everything that he needed to expose the octopus and finish the book. He was excited
Yep.
and not depressed. And I was horrified when I hear on Netflix, the last of the series, the same attorney that I'm writing to offering to give all this new evidence to help you reopen a homicide investigation, which should have been done. They
Definitely.
are telling Christian that he can come in and get access to all the evidence in the box. And we, Gordon Savell and I, had applied under Freedom of Information in 2004, 10 years before Christian Hansen, and they don't allow us to see it. They give it on Netflix to sort of tell the story that Christian Hansen says on Netflix the only person in the room that could have killed Danny Casolaro was Danny. What's your thinking
Yeah.
to
Well,
that? I mean, does that seem
I
logical?
know that's not true. I know that he didn't. I called him Thursday on a collect call on a payphone from out here. And I mean, I talked to him. I usually talk to him every couple of weeks, and I did talk to him Thursday.
My goodness.
Um, yeah.
Yep. And and did the detectives ever interview you, Trey, during the whole process?
No, no one called me. No one did anything. Just like the Sherry Seymour, she never got a hold of me when she wrote that big book thing.
Yes.
And they never even tried. They never even tried to get a hold of me or anything ever.
What do you think that I provided this evidence to your uncle Tony
Just,
Casolaro,
I don't,
asking
I
him
don't
to
think he'd
help
do
me?
anything.
I
I
asked.
don't think he'd do anything. I don't think he'd do anything because one of those things he even said in the damn in the Netflix things is how he thinks Danny killed himself.
I know. And yet, I've got the transcripts of him calling the nurse when he learnt that Danny had been embalmed,
Yeah,
angry and upset that your brother was investigating BCCI and that another journalist had been murdered who was just recently who had been investigating the same story. And
yeah,
and I have my recorded interview with Tony. I called him because I had interviewed Thomas Gates, the FBI agent that spoke to your father,
yeah,
for an hour and a half, several days before your father went to Martinsburg. And he believes that Danny was murdered and said, if I believe it and I've got this evidence, I should call Tony because he believes that your father was murdered and he will assist you to get the investigation. And when I called your Tony, he said he would. But then I learnt he gave all my evidence to Anne Klink,
of
who
course.
took all the documents from your father's house, not
Yep,
authorized to do it, sat on it, and she works for Earl Bryan and
yep,
introduced your father to Earl Bryan, who's involved in the Promus software affair, but more important,
yep,
involved in the Iran Contra arms deals with Richard Secord.
yep.
I cannot believe that he gave it to her and he would refuse to help me to reopen knowing that I've got all this evidence. And
I know.
do you know after Netflix I called him? I have my recorded
Really.
interview again with him and I asked him why is he saying that his brother was murdered and why did he give my evidence to Anne Klink, who's defaming Michael, defaming Bill Hamilton, and
Yep,
believes that Danny committed suicide, yet she held all the evidence of the BCCI checks signed by Adnan Khashoggi and manager Gorbanafar, which is the key evidence that actually is in the Martinsburg police records because we now have access to it. We've gone through all the records. I can tell you now categorically your father's evidence was there for the motive to kill him. I interviewed Jack Blum, the key investigator for Senator Kerry and the BC, and I've got recorded interviews with him asking him, did the Martinsburg police hand this evidence across to him, or the FBI or the Department of Justice, the signed BCCI checks and Monte Carlo accounts that he had? And he said no. And that's the
Nope.
key evidence that they were needing to convict Robert Altman and Clark Clifford and all the directors of BCCI who were involved in money laundering, drugs and arms with CIA.
Yep.
And 4 days before your father dies, all the people involved with the Iran-Contra missile deal, tow missile deal, Richard Secord, Oliver North, all of the people involved with that with CIA were indicted for lying about their knowledge of those transactions 4 days before your father dies. And he's holding the checks. What do you think about that? That
Well, I mean, it's all like a scandal. You can already tell.
yes. So I asked Tony a very simple question. And this is after the Netflix series where Anne Klink is defaming everybody. And she took the documents that belonged to your father from his house with all the key
Yep.
evidence that never was given to the FBI, never given to the investigators as the motive, the clear motive for killing your father.
Yep.
And I asked him, did you advise Anne Klink that Danny's dead? And why did she take all the documents? And Tony is on the record denying and telling me that she never took the documents.
Yeah.
That's not true. That's not true. So he's sitting on Netflix telling this big story that your father's committed suicide. He was depressed. It's obvious that this is all true. When in fact the police FBI records show that they went to Anne Klink's house to see if they could get the documents that she took from Danny's house to see if there's any evidence on BCCI. And Anne Klink also met with FBI to discuss these documents. He's telling me categorically that she never took it. He says that there was apparently a workman that was seen in the kitchen standing near the fridge who had taken documents that wasn't authorized to be there. I said, that's not true. Anne Klink admits in her interview that she took the documents.
Yep.
Why are you telling me that she didn't? She worked for Earl Bryan. It's a conflict of interest. It's a serious conflict of interest for an investigation that the key evidence of the BCCI checks that is confirmed that your father had in the records of the Martinsburg police is available in the records of Danny Casolaro's diaries and copies of them and the Monte Carlo, the key evidence for all the investigations of arms drugs that your father was investigating. I am so disappointed when I'm listening to the Netflix series, Trey. The the attorney that I'm writing to representing George Swartwood, telling him that I've got all this evidence and recorded interviews with Sam Cross, who was going to meet your father at a restaurant on the border of Virginia and Washington with his wife, and he says to your father, how will I recognize you, Danny? And he said, I'll be sitting at the table and I'll have my briefcase sitting at my feet under the table. And the next question is that Sam, when we interviewed Sam, he says, I've always been puzzled that they never could account for the fact that his briefcase is missing from
Of
his
course.
room with the documents because he took it everywhere with him.
Yep. There was nothing. There wasn't even a toothbrush.
it it is really really sad. Okay,
Yep.
so I do not know why Christian Hansen and Zachary deliberately left the recorded interview and the transcripts that I gave them. They had an opportunity to play it. They promised me that they wanted to present it and help you win justice. that they were even going to
Yep.
pick you up and drive you across to help you get the telephone records and the documents from the Martinsburg police. Did Christian Hansen ever contact you, interview you,
No,
or offer to
never.
help?
Nobody's ever written me a letter or anything ever in my life, ever.
It is that they lied categorically to me.
Yep.
They deceived me. And the fact is that the attorney is calling them in the middle of the Netflix series, allowing them exclusive rights to come in and see the documents for the first time. They put on camera the sketch of Joe Sequela, who we believe is a CIA hitman that set the meeting up for your father. We believe he's the key
Wow.
suspect. We told, we categorically told Christian Hansen that that's what they're going to find. And he acts as if it's all a surprise when he gets there and opens the box and has that. We gave him the legal evidence that Bill Hamilton's attorneys raised this with FBI and the Department of Justice. What are they going to do about the fact that someone has seen Joseph Queller entering his room with a key?
Yeah.
This
And none of that was ever brought up or anything.
I'm going to release today, Trey, the
Okay.
official recorded interview with Sam Cross and the evidence that I provided to George Swartwood and his attorney, offering that this is a key witness I need to speak to. The other thing that I'll mention today in the release podcast, Trey, will be I have the recorded interviews with several people that your father called them, on the last day. He had all the boxes of documents from IRS Computer Center, and I can tell you officially now that in the Martinsburg police records, there are the letters from IRS to the police asking did they find any other documents that Danny had picked up from IRS Computer Center. That was withheld from the official police reports, FBI reports, and Department of Justice reports. And the evidence that your father picked up, I can tell you categorically, it is the smoking gun evidence of everything that he was going to do when coming to Australia. Because when I play today, Christian Hansen reads out the itinerary of your father, the countries he's going to visit to do his investigation, and he deliberately left out that your father was going to come to Australia for 7 days to meet with the Royal Commission, Queen Counsel, Commissioner, and investigators for several investigations of criminality involving Wackenhut, Cabazon, Arms, and also Robert Booth Nichols and the CIA laundering drugs and arms through Australia. He left it out.
Yep.
And the reason he left it out is that he knows that I've got all that evidence because in 2004, I went and visited and met with the Queen's counsellors and asked them about the things that Danny CASOLARO was investigating, and they told me it was true. I have all the evidence of that, and Christian Hansen and Zachary both knew that I had that. They knew I had all the evidence on the Royal Commission, the arms deals in Australia, the money laundering with the Promus software, the arms and drugs and links with the mafia and CIA. They did not want any reference going to Australia because they had all my evidence. They watched my podcasts. All my podcasts on all that evidence that I provided to them was posted on my website in 2022, 2 years before they released the Netflix series. So they've made money on your father's story. They've withheld the
I'm
truth.
sure they have.
You,
Yeah, they don't do that.
yeah. Trey, I want you to know that Gordon and I are publishing our book very soon. All the evidence. We have all the evidence of the Martinsburg police. We know what they covered up. We also know what the FBI covered up in the Department of Justice. But more important, Christian Hansen and Zachary, with their Netflix fairy story, deceived the public, deceived you,
Yep.
and covered up key evidence that should have been shown. And I'm doing a documentary right now in Australia that will reveal the truth. And I'm going to be doing a TV series, documentary, that will reveal the legal evidence. And I will do my best to help you to reopen a homicide investigation because this is a disgrace. The justice system has failed your father and has failed you to win justice.
Nope. Yep. Right on.
So I will give you a link tomorrow morning. You'll be able to watch the new evidence that I provided to the Martinsburg police and the attorney, telling them that I've got this. I gave it also and told Tony that I had it, and Christian Hansen and Zachary hold copies of the recorded interviews and the transcripts that I'm playing now. And the real question is, if they had played that, that would have been the real story.
Yes, exactly.
It would have been the real story of there was overwhelming evidence that your father was murdered. And I'm going to play it
Yep.
today for the public to hear. And
Hold on.
part one today, and then there'll be part two and three and four because there's more evidence I gave them that they didn't show the public. And I promise you that the documentary that I'm doing, we will reveal the truth, and it's a disgrace. Disgrace of the
Yep.
cover up of overwhelming evidence of motives for killing your father. He wasn't depressed. People were speaking to him. They said he was excited. He had just picked up all the boxes of documents and evidence that he needed to finish the book, and he was going to call them first thing Monday morning when he gets back.
Yep.
That is not a depressed person
No,
going down to cut their wrists to commit suicide.
exactly.
Would there be anything you'd want to say to Christian Hansen and Zachary if you could say it in a podcast with me, in terms of what they
Well,
did with the Netflix series?
well, one, I didn't like it, and two, it would have been nice if they would have gotten in contact with me at all, or even tried.
I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing.
Yeah,
And remember, you're the next of kin. Do you understand?
of course.
Tony is not the next of kin. It's your right to seek justice for your father.
And they didn't even ask me or tell me even. They didn't even tell me they're doing. They did nothing at all,
I
and
know.
they still haven't.
And today I've got podcasts that I'll play. They're all congratulating each other on the justice and the credit that they've given to your father by doing the Netflix series. They think it's a credit to say that the only person in the room that could have killed Danny Casolaro was Danny.
Exactly. Yeah, and we are. I mean, we know that didn't happen. So.
I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing. All right, Trey, thank you very much for your time. And I promise you, I know that it takes time. I've been doing this for 24 years,
I
coming
know.
to 25. And so has Gordon. We're going to publish our book. We're going to do a TV series and we will reveal the truth. But we won't stop putting pressure on. The public has a right to know that the evidence was suppressed and there should be a full homicide investigation. The
Yep.
evidence was in the Martinsburg police records. They
Yep.
left it.
And they never even brought me out or talked about it ever.
No, they didn't even put it in the sort of report.
Nope.
Okay. And the documents and the evidence of email trail is I contacted the original investigative detective, George Swartwood. He knew I had this evidence that I had given to Christian Hansen and Zachary Gritz to show on TV to the public, and their
Yeah.
attorney knew it, and they would not communicate with me, but they were happy to let Christian Hansen come in with a camera to have access to the evidence. And that now I can confirm Danny, Gordon Savell and I have recovered all that evidence now. I am disgusted that they're happy to hand it over to a documentary that reinforces their conclusion that your father was depressed and he committed suicide, rather than to us who have the definitive evidence that they stuffed up. They covered up a murder.
They should get charged against them too for not bringing that out in the news or anything.
I think the fact that it's on the screen, on the public, there's no excuse for George Swartwood or his attorney to make contact with me to review the evidence. If they want to dismiss it, that's fine, but you don't ignore it.